Hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to your Daily Huddle Spiritual Matters. I am your co-host today, because I have a special guest, Dr. Monikah Ogando. And I have a quote for you. I know it's not a joke. We usually have a joke, but today I have a quote. It is the darkness that makes the light visible, not the other way around. By Nancy Rain. We're going to get into that a little bit today because the conversation is how your emotions are a gateway to spiritual maturity with myself and our special guest, Joshua Betancourt. So stay tuned. How do you not have a good day when it starts with percussion? I love it. Welcome everybody to the Daily Huddle. Giovanni, where are you today and how are you?
I am right here where I need to be. And how am I? I am however I say I am. And today I say I am thoughtful.
Ooh, thoughtful. This is a good primer for today's topic, by the way. So I'm glad that you're feeling that you're declaring yourself thoughtful today. I love it. And let's see, Leslie, what are you grateful for and who are you going to hug today? Leslie. Oh, get yourself off of mute. Oh, get yourself off of mute. Okay, we're
Hello,
gonna go.
Leslie.
No? Okay. Sorrel, what about you? What are you grateful for and who are you gonna hug today?
I'm grateful for the rain and I'm going to hug my beautiful wife.
I love it. That is always a good answer. I am so delighted that you are all here today because we've never had a summer series in the Daily Huddle before, I've heard. And in the Spiritual Matters Thursday, we've never had a guest. So today is the first of many. And I want to introduce you to Joshua Betancourt. He is an adept within the lineage of King Solomon. He is initiated via the Modern Mystery School as a second step ritual master. He holds an active life activation practitioner certification. He's also a certified neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner. And his life's work is centered around offering examples of how others can heal themselves through multiple modalities, including aspects of perceptualization, energetics, self-concept, divine alignment. And this unique approach to conscious development and expansion is not only unique, but profoundly effective. So I am delighted that Joshua joins us today. Welcome, Joshua, to the Daily Huddle Spiritual Matters.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. It's really
and how perfect that you have Archangel Michael right behind you. It's like I feel bodyguarded. You know what I mean? I feel like protected and carried through. I love it. So you and I talked before, and we talked about this particular topic, which is your emotions as a gateway to spiritual maturity. Tell us more about how you've come to be. I mean, you have a lot of accolades under your belt. So how did you come to be this kind of like hunger for spiritual mastery and for personal development?
Yeah, it's perfect entry. So I, about 8 years ago, went through a divorce and then a pretty bad relationship. And coming out of the other side of that, I needed healing. And I recognized that, I needed to do one of two things. One was, kind of address what was happening mentally. And then the other was address what was happening spiritually. So that's kind of how I, really embarked on the path of spiritual development and spiritual growth. And it's funny because it totally aligns with your emotions as a gateway into spiritual development. It was the depth of those painful emotions that drove that action.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, that's great. And so with the work that you do with your clients and with people that you that come through the Modern Mystery School tour, Modern Mystery School, what is it that you find that most people come, what's the presenting? Is it that they've gone through a hard time and they're trying to make sense of it? Or is it like a general sense of dissatisfaction? Where do people come to, and then where do they get off the bus?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of people who find themselves on a spiritual journey do so because of pain, right?
Mhm.
And kind of when we look at that, it really is their perception of their experience and how it might not be in alignment with their values. And because that's really what pain is, right? It's when we're experiencing something that is out of alignment with something that we hold in high value. And so when there's that discord, you start looking for ways to resolve it either within yourself or the outer experience. So we find in the mystery school that a lot of people come, to the doors of the mystery school with the hopes of being able to heal those different kind of challenges, whatever they might be. They're unique to the individual, but typically that's the case. So where do they get off the bus? To get started, we offer something that's called a life activation. And it gets into quantum physics, but it essentially is a way to really connect with a deeper sense of that divine aspect of what it is that we are. And we can talk for days on from a scientific perspective about DNA and genetics and how all of those things play a part in that. But that's really the first step, is getting a life activation.
I love that, life activation, because a lot of times what happens is that we kind of like on automation, on automaticity.
Yeah.
And we're just duplicating whatever was downloaded to us when we were children, and kind of like just living out of that script. And it takes sometimes, not always, but sometimes it takes either a traumatic event or, like you said, confronting this thing that isn't aligned with our values in order for us to say, hold on, something's going on here. This is not the way that I want it. There's got to be a better way. And eventually we start looking. Some of us never stop.
That's right. And typically, we're pretty stubborn, right? Because we'll deal with the pain for a really long time until it gets to the tipping point, and then we're like, oh, we can't handle it anymore. And so unfortunately, some people kind of are able to self-regulate and compartmentalize, right, the different aspects of things that are incongruent, and they go through life without really, taking a deeper look. But then, some of us get fortunate, right? We're fortunate enough to experience that level of pain or that level of emotional discord, and it opens the door.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found so interesting about the Modern Mystery School is that, and I have this conversation around a lot of transformational modalities, and that is that a lot of times it's a lot of talking, like talk therapy, like psychoanalysis and so forth. And then there are other modalities, even inside of the Modern Mystery School, where it's very somatic. It's embodied in your, you have to kind of like live through, there are certain exercises that you have to engage all of your senses in order for it to have the same neutralizing effect of the trauma, because the trauma happens somatically.
Sure.
And so the neutralization has to happen somatically as well. And this is where the emotions come in, because a lot of times when you tap on that emotion, one of the reasons why we don't want to tap on that emotion is because we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to organize it. We don't know what to call it. It's just been kind of like this emotional chaos inside that we don't know how to make sense of it. And then when someone gives us a framework that holds sacred space, that helps us to name it, Fernando Flores says language is the house of being, and then knows how to guide us to alchemize that emotion into something higher, which is really what alchemy is all about. And we were talking, you don't know this, but in the one that we were talking about your body as a gateway to your spiritual maturity, we were talking about twerking, ciao, because you have to kind of like raise the energy, right? The Kundalini energy from your root chakra all the way to the top. Yeah. And we have to do that also with our emotions.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful explanation and understanding. I think this correlates very well with how neuro-linguistics programming has kind of supported the path, because you're absolutely right. I mean, in NLP, we talk about modalities and submodalities, and modalities being the equivalent of kind of the sensory perception. And then we talk about being able to actually perform recall on experiences that may have been traumatic or may have had kind of a profound emotional impact, and kind of exploring what your sensory perceptions contribute to the recollection, and then subsequently the chemical cascade that happened from hormonals, right? Hormonally, and that influences the emotional response that we experience. But you hit on something that makes a lot of sense, is because a lot of people think that it's simply just going through the context of the experience that creates the change, and that's not the case, right? It absolutely is a somatic experience. And in fact, within NLP and within the mystery school, I think one of the things that I've come to really appreciate about both of those paths is that they do provide kind of like a foundation or a safe space for you to kind of experience it kinesthetically, right? Within the body, and explore that. And so that alone, I mean, I think applying that alone to your practice will create huge leaps and bounds of progress, towards healing, towards expansion, towards awakening, or what have you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dance with that a little bit, because one of the things that I love having people walk away with from our time is selling something pragmatic or practical that they can apply, right? And so when we talk about your emotions as a gateway to spiritual maturity, that kind of sounds like highbrow, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, kind of like out there, conceptualization, right? But one of the very pragmatic ways that we can use our emotions as a gateway to spiritual maturity is with a parallel track that I call repaving and pre-paving, right? So repaving is when you're smiling because I know you recognize what I'm talking about. Repaving is when you go back to the road you've already walked, and instead of living the memory as it happened, you narrate a different experience of it. And as you narrate a different experience of it, you create a different emotional response to what happened. And if you do that enough times, because a lot of times we relive bad memories, but you repave it enough times, then it'll take the negative charge off of the emotional experience. And then you can see it with a little bit more perspective, and you can see the lesson or the silver lining, or the, how this was actually meant for you instead of this thing that happened to you. So that's the repaving part of it. And then that also helps you to pre-pave some of the stuff that happens in the future. Because a lot of times we kind of brace ourselves anticipating an impact of an accident that hasn't happened yet. And so when we can do that with a conversation that we've been dreading, or, a challenge that it's like, I don't know if I'm up to it, et cetera. But when you pre-pave that experience with the emotional experience that you would like to experience, just like you did with repaving it, then you are more set up to experience it the way that you've designed in your mind's eye, in your consciousness, because you've already lived it. And your subconscious doesn't know the difference between something you're imagining and something you're experiencing. Right? What are some of the tools that you can give some of us here on the Daily Huddle?
Yeah, you're speaking my language, right? Because a lot of what NLP does is, once you understand the foundations of the practice, then we exercise what we call patterns. And what you're speaking of aligns to both re-imprinting and future pacing, is the way that NLP kind of describes it. And it's exactly that. I think what most people don't realize is that their thought has a structure, and you can explore that structure from all of the sensory perceptions or modalities. You can explore that structure visually. You can explore that structure auditorily. You can explore that structure kinesthetically. And you actually have the ability to shift that structure. For instance, for someone who might have kind of a behavioral issue related to the way that their parents, spoke to them when they were younger, they can go back into those experiences and actually distance themselves from the sound that they hear. And as they distance themselves in that experience from the sound, the synaptic connections in their mind are actually rewiring themselves so that the brain doesn't produce the same response, right? It actually, it creates a different chemical cascade, a different production of emotional hormones based on just you applying the exercise of distancing yourself from that sound. And so in NLP, there are many practices, but I'll say one that's really, really cool, and I think is very profound. There's a pattern that's called an emotional reversal pattern. And it essentially is getting into the feeling of this emotion that you want to reverse and seeing if it has some type of movement to it, right? So just getting, going inside and finding whether or not this emotion has some sort of movement to it. And typically they do. And once you find that, then go through an exercise of reversing that motion. So for instance, let's say I'm feeling pain in my heart. I might see or feel that my heart is rotating counterclockwise, right?
Mhm.
Once I feel that movement, really go into the feeling of it, and then imagine that emotion starts rotating clockwise in the opposite direction. And what happens is nothing short of a miracle when people actually do an exercise like this. The body, like you said, the body doesn't know the difference between what's happening and what it's imagining. And when you're creating that, you're actually causing these profound changes to happen within yourself. And so I think that's a great tool to kind of explore emotions and how to use a tool to change the way you feel about things.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. We could talk about this all day, every day. I could just tell, Sorrel, it shouldn't have been a phone call. It should have been a Barnes and Noble Starbucks coffee date, but that's okay. That's another topic for another day. So I want to open it up for a dialogue in our community. If anybody has a question or a comment that they would like to insert and contribute, because this can be a tricky conversation about emotions. We have a lot of socialization around emotions, like what's appropriate to express, what's appropriate to share with others, or to let somebody else see us in, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see, what do we got? Stan, were you manually raising your hand, or was that so wrong?
I was manually, and I put the little symbol up there also.
Okay, go for it.
I think Sorrel was ahead of me though. He got his hand.
Well, I'm talking to you. Let's go.
You want to talk to me? All right. Well, hey, so listen, Joshua.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that information, and thank you, Doc. Right? I'm trying to make the emotional, because just now you gave an example. It might have been an example, but you gave about how to rewire that emotional response, right? By changing the direction or the movement in our imagination of our heart functioning or the pain. Yeah. How are we connecting emotion to that physical movement?
You want to take that, Joshua?
Yeah. So the physical movement, that exercise really is doing introspective work from an energetic standpoint, right? Okay. The way that we interpret emotions isn't necessarily tangible. It's not something that you can actually touch, but it is something that you can feel, right? And so, so think of it in that way, not necessarily that there's a physical movement of the body, while there are many practices that actually include physical movement to move through, emotional traumas or emotions. This is more along the lines of the kinesthetic sensory perception of the feeling that you have when you're feeling that pain, and searching for that movement, right? Which is a little unusual for most people. You say, hey, how does your emotions feel? How big are your emotions? What color are they? And are they moving? You say something like that to a person and they're like, what are you talking about?
That's what I was doing.
Yeah. But when you go through the exercise and you really get into it, you start feeling it. You'll find that typically emotions radiate. Like, for instance, a lot of people, when they experience something like a past experience around speaking publicly, that emotion will start in their throat and it'll work its way down to the pit of their stomach. And so you can follow the pattern of that movement, of that emotional movement, from the throat to the stomach and then all the way back up to the throat. And then in that case, you would reverse it in whichever direction it's going.
Okay. Yeah.
The other thing that I would add to that, in terms of repaving, the other thing that I would add to that is instead of going against the movement, then to go with it and just reframe it. So for example, if having a bad experience with public speaking starts with a negative emotion around your throat and then goes to your solar plexus, for example, or your gut, that I would say that instead of having it be a negative thing, it's like, oh, it's my message going from my voice all the way to my gut so that it get really centered and convicted, so that it can get really grounded and like solidified in my body, so that when it comes back up, it's got some substance. Yeah. So even though it's the same movement, I have created a new narrative about it. And now when I experience it happening, now I'm not freaking out. Now I'm just preparing to give it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. There are many approaches, and reframing is another one that is commonly practiced in neurolinguistic programming communities. But yeah, there's a lot of different tools that a lot of people don't know about that they can apply that really can transform the way that they look at their lives and how they show up in the world.
Yeah. Good question, Stan. I love that.
Yeah.
Sorrel, you're next.
Thank you, and welcome to the Daily Huddle, Joshua. My question is this: my personal tendency, when I first, became conscious of being on a spiritual path, so to speak, is that I would use being on a spiritual path for my own personal benefit. Like I'm gonna get better in life. I'm gonna get a better job. I'm gonna make more money. I'm gonna meet the right woman. All of that, right? And when you pose the question or created the context, your emotions as a gateway to spiritual maturity, what do you say to people who may be in the same shoes that I am or was? How do you distinguish between benefiting your own life here, like surviving better, and actually using your emotions and a way to deal with them to create what you're calling spiritual maturity? Did that make sense?
Yes, I think so. So I think the question is, and let me just repeat it. So how is it that we use our awareness of our emotions in contrast to personal development and improving our lives versus the path of spiritual progression? Like, how do you use emotions towards spiritual progression? Yeah, sure, I understand. So I've got a great answer to this, and I was thinking about this a lot in advance of this call, right? Because I think, and we kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the call, which is I think of the emotions now as they're pointers. They're basically signposts, and they show me areas in my life where I might not be in alignment with where I want to go. And so if I feel an intense emotion, especially if it's a painful one, then I've made a decision, or I've created a relationship, or I find myself in some circumstance that isn't in alignment with my ideal outcome, my goals. And so that is an indicator. It's like a GPS system that says, oh, wait a second, Josh, you're not going down the right path. And you need to take a look at what it is that you're doing at this moment, or you need to take a look at this relationship so that you can course correct. So I think that from that standpoint, the emotions really are a guidance system. Now, when you take that concept and you apply it to spirituality, right? Everyone wants the same thing. We want love, we want joy, we want happiness, we want, all of the beautiful expressions of love and light and joy in our lives. And we want to be able to receive as well as give that. And that, in the larger context of things, is really the path of spiritual progression. It's knowing yourself. And so these two things kind of, they correlate, right? They cross paths and they correspond with one another in the sense of, how is it that I find myself really progressing on my spiritual path? And the emotions are, I think, for most people, the very first indication or the very first guidance system that says, hey, here's how we course correct, here's how we change direction.
Does that answer your question, Sorrel?
Yeah, thank you. It did answer my question, and it also opened up a new revelation for me.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Maybe there are no such things as good or bad emotions. My emotions are simply gateways.
Right.
Any emotion is a gateway.
100%.
Yeah. I like how you defined it, Joshua. You're saying that especially the dark emotions or the negative emotions are a place where our experience isn't aligned with our values. That's right. Like when I remember a few episodes back, Giovanni, do you remember there was a few episodes back when you were saying that like you feel, when we talked about your triggers are your treasures, remember? And you said, I feel like I'm always triggered. I'm just like a trigger waiting to happen. And I think that was the most like honest, realistic experience or definition or description of the human experience. This isn't unique to one particular person. we are always a trigger waiting to happen. And it's just so happens that some of our triggers are curiosity or delight or humor, or, they're not always quote unquote dark or negative emotions. And yet those ones that feel negative are also just as useful as the other ones to tell us where we're standing, what's our position, and what's our expectation, what's our unmet assumptions, etc. That's why we have the check yourself before you wreck yourself as part of our principles. See, because if you can check yourself before you speak, before you give yourself permission to go down, a snowball of emotions somewhere else, you might save yourself a lot of stress.
Yeah,
Giovanni, you have your hands up.
Go ahead, Joshua.
I just wanted to mention that this is a beautiful thing. In Hermetic philosophy, there's this idea of the principle of polarity. And it basically says that no two opposite things are different. They're just experienced perceptually on different scales of the spectrum. So there isn't a place where hot becomes cold. There isn't a place where love becomes hate. There isn't a place where light becomes darkness. It just slowly shifts on that scale of polarity. So I think that that's an important thing to take into consideration here, because it is the discernment that allows us to have the choice, right? If we don't know what it feels like to be in pain, there's no way that we can choose to feel joy, right? If we don't know what it feels like to feel hate, then we don't have the ability to really pursue those things that bring us love. And that scale of polarity, while some people may confuse it as two opposite things, it's actually one and the same. And so this idea, Sorrel, that you mentioned about each emotion being a gateway, they are gateways. They're gateways to show us, all right, at this moment in time, my perception and the way that I'm experiencing and actually internalizing the information of the world isn't necessarily in alignment with where I want to be on that spectrum of polarity. Right? And how do I shift that? How do I change my emotions? How do I change my mind? How do I use my will and my heart and all aspects of what it means to be alive to shift that to a state that I want to experience?
That's beautiful and powerful, because a lot of times our human experience hinges upon being witnessed. And that's the power of our relationships, to be able to have this conversation with someone so that you can be witnessed in your experience and then shift it as somebody else observes you. And I think part of what happens in our relationships is that we think, like, because I'm sharing a vent or because I'm sharing my experience, that I somehow, like, if you're telling me, Joshua, about your experience, sometimes I feel like I have to say something smart to fix it, to make you feel better, etc. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just witness somebody in their process.
Yeah.
Because it assumes that you have a lot of power to create your own experience. And that's, I think, the highest honor.
Beautiful.
Giovanni, you were going to say something?
Yes, I am trying to drink it all. I like how Joshua was saying, I'm trying to let the cascade of the conversation impact me. The challenge I'm having is that you guys are like poetry, just not for everybody. But it is so intellectually stimulating, challenging, and richful that I am fully engaged. What I'm struggling with, and I wanted to just sort of say something around, it's I'm struggling saying it because my brain wants to sort of align with this style of the conversation, which is intellectually challenging. But the aspect of where I access my spirituality or where I access my emotions is not so rich with words. I am discovering this, I don't know if there is I don't know, I'm discovering something with you guys. Does love and connection comes with an effort to understand my brain, or does it come with a hug and with silence, so that my daughter, my significant other, my friends, they feel my love? And so, when I don't know if I'm making any sense to you guys, but I hope I am. I'm really making sense to myself, which is terrible when it's only I am the one who's making sense.
The only one that counts, baby.
Yeah, I suppose. So is there a gap that you guys close at some point when it comes to the implementation of the connection between the love that you are creating with your language and also on the court, when it is from to a friend to a friend to a friend to a wife? Is there, because right now I'm so intellectually stimulated, I'm like,
how do I translate this into an experience?
How do I translate this into an experience?
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll say that, Joshua, you talked about one of the Hermetic principles being the law of polarity. It's also, the law of polarity also talks about duality, right? That correspondence is as above, so below, as within, so without. And so in the same way as we have if we have it in the intellectual plane, we also have it in the emotional / somatic plane as well. That's what I mean about the above and below, right? Or that's an example of as above, so below. And so when you can experience something intellectually, it's just a matter of figuring out what right tool or word or experience or conversation or relationship would have it be the playground of that experience as well, so that it occurs outside as it occurs inside for you. And sometimes it takes several tries, sometimes it takes several conversations, sometimes it takes different chapters or different phases of the relationship. There are conversations I can have today with my daughter, because she's 25 and living on her own and she's an adult and she has some perspective, that were never available 20 years ago when she was 5 years old. And so, sometimes it's also pacing yourself and having grace with yourself so that you can walk yourself into that experience. And it's part of what we talk about in terms of, getting clear on your intention and understanding the impact of that intention, how it lands somewhere else. There's a way you throw the ball, and then there's a way that somebody catches it. That's part of the game as well.
Yeah, I'd love to add something here.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The question really, I'm so glad that you posed it, because initially for most people, as they begin to kind of walk down this path of awakening, we'll call it awakening, typically their identity is completely consumed by the mental plane, right? And the only way that they rationalize their experience, or the majority of time when they're rationalizing their experience, it's mentally. And then they'll have a few lucid moments where they feel like love, like the birth of a baby or the wedding, right? Or, the passing of a loved one, where they actually connect with the emotion of the experience. And it takes a certain level of development to understand that you're so much greater than just what you think, right? So that you can actually get to the point where you release the thing that you're thinking about and you actually embody the thing that you think about, which is what you're going for, Giovanni, right? Which is how do I exist from moment to moment, embodying the spirit of love, right? For, my family, for my friends, and get out of, the context of it. And so there's a couple of things that I think are relevant and pertain to this from a neuro-linguistic programming perspective. One is self-concept, right? It's kind of like, exploring the ideas of what it is that you really are, not necessarily what you believe or your past experiences, but what it is that you really are, I think is a big component of that. But they also correlate in the sense that as you progress, you'll slowly start to connect more with your true self, which is kind of, that presence in the moment versus the things that we're thinking about that we use to typically define ourselves.
Powerful.
Great dance.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Monikah. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody. I know that we took you a little bit past our allotted time. So thank you for being patient with us as we work through this and as we dance together. Joshua, tell everybody where they can reach you.
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. You can just find me on Joshua Betancourt. On Facebook, I'm on Instagram as Ritalin, RYTALIN. I'm always open to kind of accepting friends.
Can you type it? Can you type all of that for us?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do that. And then I'm also on the faculty of the Center of NLP here in Atlanta with Brigitta Hoeferle and Christian Hoeferle. So those are ways that you can actually get in contact with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us, being our first guest in Spiritual Matters Thursday. I'm so happy that you got to be our first one. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. Please remember our principles of living, Patty Dabrowski's 7 and my 8. Number 1, love others, love yourself, love the environment, love generously. Number 2, eat more plant-based. That will never hurt. Number 3, laugh out loud, like obnoxious, generous laughing, Number 4, stress less. 5, sleep, get to your 7 hours, at least 7 hours of sleep. Number 6, give generously, give of your time, your energy, your attention, your generosity. Number 7, shake your tail, fella. I want you to do that twerking and raise that Kundalini energy. And then, of course, number 8, and Giovanni's favorite, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Check your assumptions. It may just be the pause you need to save a life or save your face. Thank you, everybody, for being here. See you next time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joshua. Thank you, Doc.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Bye, Stacy.